Thank you. And it's a gift to be among you, among so many friends on the synodal journey. And I sit here in Chicago on the land that once was really cared for so deeply by the people of the Illinois and the Miami and the Potawatomi peoples. I've learned to name the space, just as we're going to name the space of our scriptures. And I pray that we may all care for the earth and the people in an ever more way that acknowledges our oneness in all. This was a powerful passage to engage with in looking at what's needed for a synodal journey. And I really think of this whole synodal journey as an act of hope. And I'll speak to that in a few minutes. But today's passage from Luke, while this passage is in all of the synoptics, it's the only gospel to explain why Jesus went up to the mountain to pray. Now, we may have guessed this because that is a common use of the mountain as a sacred spot. But what might Jesus have been praying about? While we don't know for certain, I appreciated the insights from the Wisdom Commentary series on Luke, which suggests that in light of what preceded this passage, perhaps he was looking to talk to his God about where do I go? What do I do? Where? When you think of what was in the earlier part of chapter 9, what preceded this was healings. He's in Galilee. And then we hear Jesus saying, the Son of Man must suffer greatly, be rejected by the elders and more, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. That's a lot to pray about, I think. Then he tells the people with him, all of you that wish to come after me, you must also deny yourselves, take up your cross and follow me there too. So Jesus very well might have been pondering in light of so many needs and so much he was accomplishing really in Galilee. Should I stay? Even as there was another draw toward Jerusalem. And we do see references to things in Jerusalem aren't so easy for prophets. They often die in Jerusalem. So where do you go? So we can imagine an encounter, our own encounters when we have questions in our lives about what do I do? And so Jesus encountering a space with his own God. And something happened when he prayed, and it happens to us also when we pray. And what we hear here is that his face changed. Something shifted in him. Something moved. And it was visible. And then Luke gives us yet another image. This passage is packed with images. That of Jesus with two other prophets, Elijah and Moses. And they are talking with one another. Jesus isn't talking to them. We read that they are talking with one another. So what might they have been talking about? Well, Elijah is the one who heard the voice of God in the sound of silence, in that listening space. And Moses, who led his people out of slavery in Egypt, was himself rejected by his own people. So I don't think they were talking about whether Moses really meant to smash the tablets. Was it an accident? Did you really mean that? No, I think they were talking about something far more weighty. I imagine they were talking to one another and sharing their journeys of what their own exodus might have been and what it meant. And then the disciples awaken in a whole new way, but they don't understand. And Peter offers good Peter, who's just always trying to help and doesn't always know where he's going with it. He offers to build a tent for each of them, right? Let's stop right here and do this. And we could build this. But that isn't what's being asked. Instead, we hear a voice that identifies Jesus, not just one of the prophets, but this is my chosen one. Listen to him. Listen to him. This is my chosen one. And so they go down the mountain, silent, pondering, to the crowds, to the healing that was needed, to what would be the suffering of Jesus, to his death, and later also to his resurrection. They would only understand in time, but they were reminded again, this is my chosen one. Listen to him. So just as Elijah and Moses bestowed the Spirit upon others, so does the risen Christ also offer upon the disciples the gifts they would need. And so it is with us today, as baptized people of God, who are walking with the Spirit on this synodal journey. So what might we take from this passage as we walk, especially in this synodal time? And this synodal time is going to go on for a very long time. So we need to keep our walking shoes on and get some staff if we need it. I suggest this passage offers us some insights into what we might need for this journey. I, at the beginning, spoke about this journey of synod as an act of hope. And I really mean that. It's not an act of confidence. It's not an act of optimism. Do we have a 50-50 chance of all the bishops listening, the words we have to offer, getting all the way to the Vatican, that it's going to get, brought into everything we're saying and everything will shift by 2023, or let's give it 2024 if we're going to give it a little more time. No, actually, this is a deep act of hope, a deep act of theological hope in a God who promises to be with us and is with us and says, but you need to journey with me too. And never mind the stumbling, but take this as an act of hope, not a noun, but it's an act. It's a verb. It's an act of hope. Right? It's also not an act of cynicism. Geez, could this really happen? Will people really listen? It's far deeper than that. We're being called in a way that, those who lived through Vatican II spoke about the monumentous movements. We're in another movement. And I think we have in these passages some helps. I offer three. One is, it's a real call to our encounter with God. And two, it's a call to listen to prophets. And let us remind ourselves the prophets are right here and all around us. And it offers us a call to discernment as we walk and some work on how shall we discern, right? As we go and work, not just be on the mountain, but down among the people. So first, some words on each of those. Encounter. I always appreciate the word encounter, but I appreciate it most in Spanish, encuentro. It's not just hello, how are you? But this is truly an encounter. How are you? Who are you? And we have in here examples in the beginning and at the end of what it's going to ask of us. And it will ask of us dialogue. It'll also ask of us silence. Be transformed is what we're being called to. Conversion. Connie mentioned this, but we're hearing this all over with the Synod. It's not just a call to change some things. It's a call to our depths to be converted. And Lent is a perfect time to engage that. It's also asking for transformation of systems, of communities, of churches, of us, right? And it was some time ago that Connie Fitzgerald also spoke about the kind of conversion we're being called for the sake of the entire earth. And that's even a cosmic conversion, a cosmic consciousness, a way of seeing that would say, of course not a war in Ukraine and Russia. Of course not. And what must we be about to evolve to that point? And this is part of the journey. And Pope Francis reminds us so powerfully, this is not an era of change, but it's a change of an era. That's what we're in. Change of an era. We're not just, we're seeing change everywhere, of course, but it's a change of an era of our church, of religious life, of our societies. Look what's happening in light of our democracies, every area. And you can feel it actually. We'll need encounters with God and silent encounters in order to walk this way. And we're going to need one another, which moves me to the second, listening to prophets. I've appreciated very much that a number of people over the past years have talked about not just the individual prophets, but prophetic communities, that we're going to need to be linked to prophetic communities in this time and create more and more of those. And not so we say, I'm a prophet. No. Remember that things don't go so well for prophets, right? We're called to be followers of Jesus, and the same may happen to us there too. But I find it really interesting. We're listening, in this passage, the prophets Elijah and Moses. And I'm thinking of Hannah and Ruth and Naomi and Mary Magdalene and Mary, Jesus's mother. And I would love to have a conversation with the woman who anointed Jesus. So we're invited to these prophetic conversations, to these conversations with prophets, and to widen that scope, Can't be forgotten today, March 12th is also the anniversary of the martyrdom of Rutilio Grande and his companions, right? Prophets both denounce injustices and announce the good news. We can't just do one. We can't just say, the system is broken. But we're called to, by our very lives, to point toward what's possible. And so you were invited to think about, what's the role of women? What might be other ways of doing structures? What other ways of being community? What are we already doing that we need to announce and to share, right? These are those synodal questions. And we're called to create spaces for this and to share the stories, right? Less people say, but is anything happening? It's been fascinating to me that, Davenport, Iowa, that diocese created a process called 58,000 cups of coffee. So I'm not sure I want 58,000 cups of coffee at the moment, but their invitation was, with about 20,000 people, little less than that, in their diocese, what if everyone had 3 cups of coffee? So a cup of coffee with someone who's in your parish, in your church, someone who, since the pandemic, you haven't seen, and a third cup of coffee with someone who maybe was once part of the church community and is no longer, or was never part of it. So what might you learn? And a listening space, right? Where each has something to learn. So there are things happening, and people are posting things on their website as well. So too with structures, to think about circles rather than going top down, right? And to be attuned to right now on this journey, take everything in. Let every voice teach us something. And to not dismiss our voices, and if I may say, women, at times we do that. We can dismiss, just a little point, just something to offer. But no, that is not of God, right? And so we cannot dismiss what might even happen. It was in January, and because of COVID, one of the conferences I often attend, the Society of Christian Ethics, and the theme there was on ethics in the academy, so the institution, and ethics in the church. And after one of the plenaries, I just raised my little hand, my Zoom hand, and asked the question whether the 2 of the panelists were Roman Catholic. And I said, do you think anything's possible with the synodal process? And I got the usual responses of, wow, it's very hard for power to let go of power. How will that happen? What, and all of that. However, as we love these little sidebars in the chats, I had personal messages from two people who were involved in their diocesan process. And we started a conversation. And now we're looking at creating a process for the Catholic theological ethics in the world church and hearing from voices across the globe and saying, as theologians, I wonder, is there something we might offer? In some way, we might yeast in this space. But the other was a message from a young man who said, I want to invite you. I'm doing one of the breakout sessions, and it's on synodality. I hadn't looked at the whole program, but I said, sure, when is it? And I went to it. And he talked about the synodal process being a space where someone like himself, who belongs also to the LGBTQ community, and says, this may be a space where I'm heard, and this is why. So we can never dismiss these conversations, right? And even last week in my small group among you, to hear a woman say, who's lived her life in the church and offering quite a bit, saying, this is the first time my church is asking me what I think. I was heartbroken, honestly. And I thought how blind I am in a religious congregation that I feel like is always asking me what I think and what I this and that, and going, be aware of so many places we don't have that. So there are the stories. And so how might we offer something in the midst of this, right? Tanamaya last week just very powerfully, in addition to Marianne speaking about here comes the people, said there are people all over the world. And I found myself listening to some of the people around the world. And one group of folks who reached out to a number of people in countries that they're part of spoke about surprises they were hearing, right? Things that they thought people would say and are hearing yet more, right? So for one was, Central America, that the real issues for so many were related to migration and what happens to the people who come from all over the world and through South America, through Guatemala, and then stop in Guatemala. What is the church in Guatemala doing for the people there? And that question, right? And a question from India, an insight in there. What is synodal is that we need to look at all the different cultures we're part of. And that we're wondering what it is we are doing as a church to bring together people of different cultures so that we're not going to be more polarized. And so we know the polarization in the United States as well, but we're hearing different voices. And I think the voices of women are going to be important ones in the midst of this. And we have women who are artists who remind us of much. Right? I'm hoping you're seeing this. Right? And so we hear from the artist Janet McKenzie, who's been able to, for so long, able to see so many different voices and so many different ways, from Elijah to the Jesus of the millennium, that went beyond what some people were willing to engage. And her prophetic artistry actually created a lot of pain for her from others. And we also have the artists who remind us of, aren't there some ways to look at this? And this wonderful image of a new way of governing. We have Pope Francis there listening to the people, right? All the people in there. But I found myself going, is that really the image of church I want? And I was going, if we're going to listen to everyone, then maybe we need to change the structure too of how we listen. And maybe it's not going to be top down, bottom up from somebody or other, but maybe it'll be more like these equal squares. So when Pope Francis was listening to students from South America, Latin America, North America about their hopes and their thoughts about the church, and he was truly listening among them, right? But I was also wondering, might it be this right here that is going to happen? So the women in a group, might it be this? And you'll forgive me, I hope, that one group of you here today is in this image that I took, and that it would be Maybe not cups of coffee, but I also like mate, I have to tell you. It's got wonderful caffeine and a great taste, but it's Pope Francis's drink too. But might we find other ways together to look at this, right? And to have these conversations. So might we be, like this wonderful painting from the Thai restaurant down the street from me, like this, just talking to one another. Might we also be, if we're going to be honest in our sharing, also be speaking about death, about pain, about woundedness? We cannot let those not be heard. They have to. And that could be frightening to some. So how do we create the spaces so all of these emotions, and this is a painting that's in the back of the San Antonio Cathedral. So all of these emotions, all of these ways can be heard. Because if we're going to be synodal, we will walk with each other in joys as well as in pain. And so how might we? What might that be, right? And so, we also have a pope who's saying, I really want to be synodal, and was trying to do that already with the Synod on Youth, right? And before that, who asked people between interventions for silence, which here in the Carmelite, that so well, and you remind us of that as we pray. And might we find different images of synodality like this one from Australia, with Bishop Long among the people listening? And might we find some examples right here in Ireland where the lead on the work of synodality is a woman who has background in reconciliation and conflict resolution? And we're even being invited and called to not limit ourselves to our own faith tradition, to go well beyond it, and to all the people of God, right? And Caritas International, Campaign for Human Development, all these groups are being asked, who are your people and how do we listen to their voices too? To those with homes and without homes, right? How do we listen to the mother of George Floyd, calling on to us, crying out? How do we listen to the people around us and be willing to be surprised? Be willing to be surprised, because we might hear that some groups are looking at how do we work better with our relationship and our stories and histories with Native American peoples, with the African American community, with the injustices that are going on. How do we find ourselves? We'll be listening, but as Pope Francis has said, listening has to be mutual. And how do we go at that? So how do we look at this, right? And there we move to the third point, my last point here. What's going to be invited of us on the synodal process is a communal discerning stance, to hear all in light of our faith, to hear all, listen to him, listen to her. Where is love needed? Where is healing needed? Truth telling. This is where the Spirit calls us today. And to be willing to live ad experimentum, to begin, to test, to try, not to have to do anything perfectly, but to walk it together. Not waiting for Rome, because the Spirit is already working here. And what we are about, the transformation that might happen on the local level, can impact the other. They will. They're meant to. Pope Francis is putting it all together. So we go down that mountain and we go in silence, but we also go in need of some spaces for this kind of way of being together, right? With full participation, with the communion, right? Which is being called for, which goes beyond collaboration. It's a deeper calling to live our mission as the people of God. And we will need, in order to transform these structures, ways of discerning. And here I appeal to those of you, many of you, who have your own spiritual practices, whether it's the Carmelite practice, the Franciscan practices of discernment, Redemptorist, St. Joseph, you name it, right? Jesuit. How might we together discern our way forward? Pope Francis is asking for this. The whole people of God is asking for this. So we have something to offer, all of us here. We'll walk together. And just as the disciples kept getting surprised, I invite us to expect surprises from the Spirit. The Spirit is far more creative than we are. Just when we think we know, something else shows up. Who knew the synod process would move here, right? It's the process of walking that will change us here. And it's always an acknowledgement that this process we're on is a deeper call than we can even yet imagine. And so we take gratitude at our moment, in this moment, for the Spirit who's moving us in the midst of this. And I close with this wonderful quote from Pope Francis that gives us hope and courage. I'm certain, he says, I am certain the Spirit will guide us and give us the grace to move forward together, to listen to one another, to embark on a discernment of the times in which we are living in solidarity with the struggles and aspirations of all humanity. All humanity. Kiev, Moscow, Chicago, Baltimore, Harare, Sydney, everywhere. Amen.